Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Alaska SeaLife Center for another virtual visit. As always, my name is Alex, and we've got Laura running the computer today. So they'll be watching for any questions you might have if you type them in the chat, or uh, if you can text us at that number, or you can also email us at asktuffy@alaskasealife.org if you're not watching this live, and we'll try to get to that. And that's ASKTUFFY at alaskasealife.org. Any questions you've got. But before we really get into the program today, I want to thank our sponsor as always. So Royal Caribbean Group has made it possible for us to bring you these programs live Wednesdays at 11 a.m. Alaska time. Now we've got this one, we've got the next one, and then we're actually going to be kind of taking a little break for the summer, kind of following the school season here in Alaska or in the U.S. And so stay tuned to our YouTube channel because we will be doing more videos kind of through the summer. But next week's going to be a really fun one. We're going to take a look at our first rehab patient, or first rehab collection kind of the season. So if you're interested in what sort of marine mammals might come in for care here, tune in next week for that. This week, we're going to be talking about probably one of the most unique animals we have here at the Alaska SeaLife Center. But before we get started on that, we are going to take a look at today's sunrise. As always, this is just off our back porch here from 8 a.m. excuse me, to about 10 a.m. or 8:30. That's what I'm running at 8:30 to 10:30. And you can see, I mean, it's really, really flat out there in the bay today. So this is Resurrection Bay. It does butt up right against the northern side of the Gulf of Alaska, so it might be rough out there in the Gulf. I actually don't know what the weather's like out there today. But here in Seward, a little overcast, but very flat on the water. If you wanted to get out there for some whale watching, go look for orcas, today'd be a great day for that. So as I mentioned, today we're going to take a look at one of the most unique animals that we have, one of the animals that people have sometimes the most questions about. So again, feel free to chime in at any point with any questions you might have, but we are actually back in one of the exhibits here at the SeaLife Center. We are in our Octopus grotto. And so this is what it looks like out from on the floor. Kind of dark, kind of foreboding. We've got like a little entry there that sometimes kids will crawl through down there. But we are actually inside that exhibit right now. And so back behind me, you can actually see we've got a tank in here, and back behind the glass, it's actually kind of similar to some of the exhibits we've seen before, you know, open top, but there's the animal we're going to be talking about today. And unfortunately, that is not a live shot. I'm actually going to spin my camera a little bit here, and we'll see if we can see this animal. So this is, of course, the giant Pacific octopus. The one we've got in here today is El Dorado, and there you go. That's El Dorado's grand appearance for this virtual visit. She is napping. And I will say that octopus, we kind of joke here, they are sort of like the cats of the sea. So they will nap for most of the day, and then maybe they'll wake up and kind of have the zoomies for like 5 minutes and really, really run around. So there's every chance that El Dorado will wake up while we're doing this program, and you might see her whipping around back behind me. But the past few weeks, I've had the opportunity, and also Taylor, we kind of shadowed some of our aquarium folks here and saw what it takes to take care of these animals because they're a little different than everything else. And in other virtual visits, of course, we've seen, you know, feeding of some of our aquarium animals. We've seen like how the tanks are constructed. Octopus kind of require their own thing. So we're going to get started by talking about the fact that, yeah, it's a giant Pacific octopus, but it's not always giant. So we do have multiple sizes here, and we have in the past had a freshly hatched paralarvae. So they start out teeny, teeny, tiny, like really, really small little octopus larvae. And they kind of just bloop around. At this point, they've got some chromatophores there, these little colored dots on them. And so on the left, you've got them as a larvae. Eventually, they grow up big enough, and they'll settle out, but this is still under a year there on the right. So still pretty young, pretty small, as you can see from that dime. And at this point, once they settle out, they're going to start looking for a safe place. They're going to look for a den. They don't float around in the ocean anymore. So here we have one kind of tucked up inside of a mussel shell. And it's able to fit in there. And it's not always just like mussel shells that these octopus like as their homes. We've actually got a little coffee mug right next to the tank that's got the mussel shell. And believe it or not, octopus really like coffee mugs. They like all sorts of like pipe-shaped, anything with sort of little round ends and like an enclosed side. basically they're looking for a little cave, and a lot of times they sort of like a more artificial cave we've found. We have tried to provide them with nice rock caves, and they usually end up preferring some pipe that we put in there as well. They really tuck in there. You can see this one's kind of snoozing. As I said, that's what they tend to do, just sort of suspending between the ceiling there. And so this octopus here, then, this one's probably about 3 years old or so. So you can see they get quite a bit larger. Different tank, but when we were filming this, it had a giant PVC pipe in there as its den. And then eventually this octopus, this is actually El Dorado back there, about 4 going on 5, pretty close to full age for these animals. And they get big. They can actually get up about 20 feet from arm tip to arm tip. They do all that in, just under 5 years, this growth, right? They start as that little blooping larvae that we saw where they kind of were just drifting around in the water. And then they finally grew up enough, they settled out, and we moved into slightly larger tanks, and then eventually we can move one into our habitat here. And I will say we only have the one octopus in here, El Dorado. We don't put octopus in together, and that is because we don't actually think they would enjoy that. They're pretty territorial animals. They're pretty standoffish animals, I should say. It's not like they're out there like, my territory. Instead, they don't really like to be next to other octopus unless it's breeding season, or at least breeding time for them. It's not a season in the year so much as it's a season in their life. These animals reproduce only once at the very end of their life, similar to, we've talked about salmon, for example. So she will go out, she'll find mates, and then she'll actually retreat back to her den and lay some eggs, guard those eggs, and then that's how we get those little hatchlings that we saw. But we're going to talk about feeding them now, because that is how most people end up interacting with them here at the SeaLife Center. We actually do have an experience that you can do here at the SeaLife Center where you go back and you can not only see how they're fed, but you can kind of help. And you'll notice a little something about El Dorado's tank here. We're going to talk about tank construction in a bit. But usually you have to get the octopus's attention. And so here Steph is sort of splashing water over onto the suckers. And I think she ended up actually using some of the food to splash water over onto the suckers. Those suckers, there's hundreds of them on the 8 arms that this octopus has, and they can all taste. So this is how they're getting the attention. They're sort of splashing, they're like making little ripples in the water, but they're also splashing like flavored water at them. And eventually the octopus comes on over, and you can kind of interact with it. It'll reach out, it'll touch you, it'll be like, are you food? And you can hand it food. And you can see, kind of tucked that food there onto the sucker, and it was brought underneath the rest of the arms. So the mouth is in the middle there. Here's another feeding session. I love this clip because it tastes that fish and it grabs onto it with some suckers and then just like yanks it off the cliff. So yeah, it's very fun to see these animals eat, and they do grip onto us as well. Not so much that they're wanting to eat us, but I'm sure we taste pretty interesting to them as they're reaching with these suckers. They can get a good enough grip to sort of give you like a hickey. We've seen folks here with little octopus hickeys on their arms. Here's Humphrey. So Humphrey's that tiny little guy that we saw in the mussel shell. So what's it like feeding him? He's a little different. He's very standoffish. He likes to be up in his shell. So they kind of got to lure him. And there he is, attacking that piece of food. He's very fierce, despite being very, very tiny. They are predators, right? So out in the wild, they are actively hunting their prey. So here we'll try to jiggle it around for them. If they're not quite feeling just coming over and taking it from us, we'll have to jiggle it around and make it kind of seem like it's alive. And then getting all the way back to the hatchlings, we have to feed them too. They are so small, we have to feed them brine shrimp. So this one's got a brine shrimp. You can kind of see its arms there, but all those little dots around are also little tiny brine shrimp. Once they're full grown, that's more what the octopus were going for as these paralarvae. So that's how we feed them. But I just want to talk about those hatchlings real quick. I think we've got just some clips of those that we can pull up. But we have had them here in the past. We have had eggs successfully hatch out. They're very tiny. We actually have to keep them in special tanks. So the tanks that we keep them in are the plankton tanks. If you tuned in for our episode last week where we were looking at aquarium going out and collecting items, we kind of saw that there's like that plankton tank that we were keeping all of our shrimp larvae in right now. Well, that's the sort of plankton tank that we'll keep these octopus in. Now, eventually they grow big enough. They go through a couple little changes. Their arms get longer. they get bigger, heavier, and they sink out of the water column. They settle out, and that's sort of when they become an octopus more as we know them instead of a larvae. And unfortunately, here at the SeaLife Center, we haven't been successful. And that's not just us. The giant Pacific octopus has kind of eluded efforts to grow it from an egg. It's only been done, like once. I want to say it was back in like the 60s, but it was down in Seattle. They managed to do it, but other species of octopus and even other relatives of the octopus, like squid, cuttlefish, some of those could be reared quite easily in human care. Even other species of octopus, but the giant Pacific octopus has eluded us. While those little paralarvae are blooping around, though, they are adorable. So do we have any questions yet? All right, Laura's keeping an eye on the questions there, so if they see any, they'll toss them our way. But we did mention that we have to have a special tank for the paralarvae. Well, we also have to take special considerations with the octopus even once they're not larvae. And that has to mostly do with lids on their tanks. So we actually do have some concerns, right? Of course, they have these 8 muscular arms. They're able to grip really well. If these are, I mean, this animal's pretty much pure muscle. So if it wants to lift the lid off of its tank, it wouldn't be an issue. The other problem you can see here in this clip, they are very squishy. There's no bones in there. The largest hard part is actually their beak, their mouth. So if they can squeeze their beak through an opening, they can get the rest of their body through. And that makes them excellent escape artists. So we have taken precautions. We don't want them to even be able to get their lid up a little bit. So here we've got some dive weights up on top of this lid here. Again, this octopus, a little bit younger, so it wouldn't be able to lift. And then as they get bigger, we have to take even greater precautions. We've got like these, woodworking clamps, basically holding the lid down so that the octopus cannot lift it up. They are very curious animals, so it wouldn't be unheard of them to kind of pop that lid and reach some arms out. And if they get themselves out, they can get into trouble, right? And we don't want them drying out. But that brings us to the main habitat in that grotto. It's a little bit different. It doesn't have a lid. Now, as we saw, it does have these nets, right? And that's not really to keep the octopus from jumping out, but mostly to keep the octopus from being able to slap an arm all the way out of the tank there. But the rest of it, no lid at all. And instead, we take a kind of a weird approach to this. The top is actually carpeted. You're going to see here, right? We've got Dorado cruising around the back. Can kind of grip the wall back there. But where she could get out, it's all just carpet. Not only can they not really get a grip on that carpet, like here you can see really easily gripping onto that rock, but once you get up to the carpet, it doesn't really grip, it just kind of sits there, this slimy arm. But they also don't really seem to like the feel of it too much. They're like, oh, carpet. But we've seen other facilities use, like AstroTurf, fake grass, and that sort of thing as well. So the carpet is all that's really needed to keep this large octopus in its tank. And at this point, she's kind of getting towards that period where she's going to be maybe thinking about like, oh, I'll settle out. So she'll have a really active period, and then she's going to kind of get pretty calm. So right now, this tank is her den. This is her safe place. But she's a curious animal. As I said, cats of the sea, definitely a little too curious, a little too smart for their own good. So we just have to protect them, have to make sure that they can't, get their arms out and then pull themselves all the way out. And we're going to talk about it, but they're a little too heavy probably to pull themselves all the way up by the areas they can grip. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But I want to talk about if you've got a cat at home. We're just going to continue on this theme of cats. My cats at home like to help with chores, right? So if you're like doing laundry, they're like, oh, here I am, I can help. Or whenever we make the bed, one of my cats insists on being under the sheets when you do like the big parachute sheet out on the bed. He runs under there and makes it not flat. Octopus very much the same, but they do require care of their habitat, just like any of our habitats here. So when we clean these habitats, a couple considerations. First of all, the food that we're feeding them sometimes can have shells. So this is a little bit of crab shell in there from a meal that Dorado had. Got to get that shell out of there. And unfortunately, a red urchin's holding onto the piece of shell down there. So reaching all the way down into this tank with a net, it's a little bit of a process to begin with. We're trying to get this shell away from the urchin that's really holding onto it. But obviously, we want to keep these tanks clean. So getting in there, getting any leftover food, any detritus, any waste We want to get that out of there. And so here, I believe this was Steph doing a really good job maneuvering that net around. But it's not just nets. We also have to clean the windows. And so for that, we use this little scraper. And again, it is on a long stick. Now, you might be like, how do I know where I need to scrape, right? Because we're looking for little things that are growing on the window. And the way this works, it's actually a team effort. So Steph is on the inside with the scraper, but Kim came out onto the floor. And so Kim can actually direct Steph where to go. And there you can see El Dorado is kind of curious about this scraper. That's a little bit of a portent of things to come. But here's Kim highlighting where something is on the glass. So she just puts a light up to the glass there. And that light does shine through. Now, this is underwater, this shot here. So it looks nice and clear. I want you to be able to see how they're working. But this is what it looks like from the surface. It's not nearly as obvious. It's just kind of an area where all of a sudden your scraper gets really bright. And so they'll talk to each other on the radio. Kim will be like, oh, you know, there's a spot kind of over to your left, over to your right. And while they're doing this, they're kind of having to dodge the lurking octopus. Because if El Dorado's napping, great, let her nap. But if she wakes up for zoomies while you are cleaning her habitat, that's going to be a problem because she's very curious, very playful, and she kind of gets in the way. Here you can see they had to kind of like shuffle and try to keep ahead of her, and she just basically put herself directly in the way, and they had to kind of just take a break and let her pass. And she, you know, you're like, well, is she just going back and forth, or does she actually see the scraper? Is she interested in the scraper? Oh yes, she wants the scraper, so she actually jumped in there and grabbed it, this time with her suckers. Now, it's not food, right? She can taste that. She's like, oh, that's just like plastic. I don't want that. And she didn't put up much of a fight. She really let go of that pretty quickly. But that's the cleaning of our tanks here. Just like if you have a cat at home, the octopus really like to participate sometimes in the chores, get in the way there. Looks like a question.
We have two questions. Do male octopus live longer than females? And can males reproduce more than once?
Whoa, all right, great questions here. So speaking for giant Pacific octopus here, there's actually a lot of interest, a lot of research into how different octopus reproduce. Because of course, as I mentioned, octopus at the end of their life, they reproduce like the one time, the one portion of their life, and then they pass away. And so there's actually been research into, are there any octopus that can breed multiple times throughout their life, and that sort of thing. So the two questions, right? Do males live longer? On average, males are probably going to have a shorter life expectancy, and that is due to the differences in behavior during reproduction. So for the females, when they're reproductive, when they are looking for a mate, they do leave the den, they'll go around, they'll find a couple mates, and then they can actually go back to their den. They'll tuck up safe in that den, they'll lay their eggs, and they'll guard those eggs until they finally pass away around the time those eggs are hatching. So for the rest of her life, right, the octopus is tucked up in the den and protected. But the males, on the other hand, they don't need to go back to a den and guard eggs. So they just wander around looking for potential mates for the rest of their life. And they will slowly sort of waste away at this point as well. But it's much more likely that their life will be cut a little short during that period because they're not as interested in tucking into dens and hiding. It's likely that something like a shark, or we have seen like sea lions go after them. Even octopus, or excuse me, even otters can eat like a giant Pacific octopus. I've seen them out there with like this big octopus draped across them. So it's much more likely the male's life gets cut a little short because he doesn't go back to the den. And then the other question, do the males reproduce more than once? It's the same situation where it's the end of their life is the reproductive portion of their life. But they, of course, can have multiple mates. And that's actually been found. There's been some studies into the females as well. They can have potential multiple mates as well before they finally settle in to their den and lay those eggs. Looks like another question right away.
Yeah. How long do they live and how many babies do they have?
Perfect. All right, so we're talking about all of this right now, so these are great. So how long do they live? The giant Pacific octopus can live about 5 years. Maybe a little bit longer, maybe a little bit shorter, depending. But that's actually pretty long as far as octopus go. A lot of octopus are only like 2 years old. Smaller octopus live a shorter period of time. There are other octopus that we're fairly certain live an even longer period of time. Deep, deep water octopus may live even into their 20s. There's some crazy papers right now out there about these deep water octopus and how long they might actually live their whole life. But our octopus, about 5 is kind of what we're looking at. Now, the other question, how many babies they had. So they don't give live birth, they'll lay eggs, but the female is going to lay anywhere from 20,000 up to 100,000 eggs, maybe a little more than that, in the giant Pacific octopus. So she actually takes care of those eggs. She'll blow water over them to keep like algae from settling on them. She'll tend to them, and basically she's not going out to get food anymore. She's solely interested in taking care of these eggs, and so she'll just slowly sort of waste away. And as I said, right around the time those eggs hatch seems to kind of be when they pass away. So, all right, no other questions right now, but we are actually going to go on to the weight of the octopus. So how do we keep track of their weight? This is a fun one. So you can't really weigh them easily in the water. So Steph and Kim here, they actually went back and they had to coax El Dorado into a net. So here they are, El Dorado fastened up in the corner, as per usual. And they were like, come on, we got food over here. They were like trying to like peel her suckers off a little bit to encourage her to move, and she just wasn't having it. But eventually she left, she got off the wall there enough that they were able to scoop her into this big net. Now you can see this is a big animal, and they can take her out of the water for brief periods of time. She'll trap water inside of her body, and the gills can still access that water. So she's going to be out of the water here. They have to make sure she doesn't escape again, right? Because she's very slimy, she's very squishy. So if she manages to get enough of her body out and get a grip on something, then she would actually come back out of that net. But eventually we got her in the net, and then I was able to assist for this holding the trash can. So this trash can looks a little weird. It's not going to be any good for holding, say water or anything like that, because it has all these holes on the side, and the purpose of that is to allow water to drain out. So we are moving her from the net, and there you can see, once most of her's out, she just like up and out of the net. That's sort of how they'll move up over, if you see like an octopus moving from tide pool to tide pool in a documentary, they sort of slide. There is a lid to keep her in there. And then we actually walked down, we had a scale there, and we were able to put her on the scale. We drained the water out of that the garbage can, and we just weighed her. So there is 18.10 kilograms, and minus the weight of the, I don't remember what the final in kilograms was. I'm going to have to do conversion really quick, but she was about 35 pounds minus the weight of the trash can there afterwards. So, and then they just lowered that trash can back in, and she ran out, and then I think she got some food to make her not so pouty about the whole ordeal. It is quite a process, but sort of measuring their growth, it helps us keep tabs on what stages of their life they're in. There's actually a whole period where they go through a giant growth spurt, right? Because we saw the little hatchlings, and then we saw like the under 1 year, and then we saw like the 3 years, still pretty small, but then like into 4 years, like boom, big growth spurt there. Another question, it looks like.
Yes. How does the giant Pacific octopus compare in size with other species of octopus and squid?
Oh no. All right, so giant Pacific octopus it's argued to be the largest octopus species in the world. There's a couple species that are also pretty close. I don't remember their names, unfortunately, off the top of my head. There's one down in like New Zealand that's also quite a large octopus. And then there are some pelagic octopus, so we can get into that. Giant Pacific octopus mostly down on the bottom, although they can get up in the water and swim. But there are some octopus that spend most of their lives swimming around. So that's a pelagic octopus when it swims around most of its life. So there are a couple about the size of the giant Pacific octopus, but you're not really going to find octopus larger than that. And as I said, up to about 20 feet from arm tip to arm tip. And they can get up over 100 pounds. Right now, El Dorado is like 35 pounds. The largest octopus we've had here got up to about 88 pounds or so. And so, they can get quite large. But compared to something like a giant squid, right? There are squid that get larger than the giant Pacific octopus. So there's actually several species. Even here in Alaska, we've got things like the robust clubhook squid, which kind of, it gets pretty large. It's not like full giant squid. Then you've got squid that can get up over 20, over 30 feet long. And then you get up to like the giant squid. Is the giant squid the biggest squid, or is the colossal squid the biggest squid? And as I understand it, giant squid is the longest squid, but the colossal squid is the most massive squid. It's just the biggest, bulkiest, heaviest squid. And total lengths on those, I can't tell you what the maximum is. I know I've seen some estimates up to like, oh, maybe they get up to 40 feet. Unfortunately, with these measurements and guesstimates, there's a lot of stretchiness to them as well. But off the top of my head, I don't know the record sizes for those two. But larger squid, but as far as octopus goes, this is the largest species of octopus. Any other questions? All right, perfect. So trash can for the weighing is not the only time we use it. We'll also use it for a den occasionally, because as I mentioned, they like those artificial dens. So sometimes we'll just slice a trash can in half and weigh it down on the bottom, and it kind of forms that little like arch for them, and they'll tuck up in there. But we'll also use it if we release one of our octopus. So here you can see the diver's same sort of trash can. It's got all the holes in there. The giant Pacific octopus is unique in our aquarium animals in that this is the one we are permitted to release. At the end of the animal's life, when it starts to become reproductive, we can actually release these animals back out to where they were collected. So this particular animal here, this is Egg, who is found on Easter Sunday, just nearby the SeaLife Center. And so he was the Easter egg, and we named him such. But he got released, and then he actually stuck around for a little bit, flashed some cool patterns, and the divers were able to just chill with them for a bit. The rule is we have to release them where we collected them from, so we have had other octopus come to the SeaLife Center from, not Resurrection Bay, and those animals can't be released because we can't, get back to where they were. And likewise, we have had some here that we have a breeding pair mature at the same time, so we can actually breed them here, and those won't get released. But once they become reproductive, especially if we don't have anyone that we are breeding them with, or if we're not currently looking for any hatchlings, we will release them. And here, Egg kind of chilled with the divers for a little bit, took one big breath of water, and then kind of just jetted off into, well, kind of foggy almost, but it's our glacial silt here. The water visibility is not the greatest in Resurrection Bay, but it's very picturesque sometimes. All right, so we will release those animals if the opportunity arises, and it's always fun to be able to see those animals kind of get back out and then go off in the wild. And they're not going to be out there really hunting for food or anything like that. They are out there looking for mates, and so to give them the opportunity to do that right there at the end of their life is it's pretty special to be able to do that. Any other questions there?
Yes, we've had some questions about brains and hearts and how many do they
Oh
have and do
no.
they really have one brain
All
per
right.
arm and all that fun stuff.
Brains and hearts, always questions we get. Hearts, real easy. They got three. They have three hearts. So each gill, they have two gills, and each gill has a heart dedicated to it. And then there's a central heart that pumps blood all around the body. The brains, people are like, do they have 8 brains? Do they have 9 brains? You hear it everywhere. The thing about these organisms is they don't really have a brain. Their nervous system is kind of distributed through their body, and there's clusters where those nerves kind of come together called ganglia. But they do have pretty substantial nervous systems down each of their arms. So those arms are tasting, they're feeling, they can almost do their own thing. Right? So if the octopus is like, I'm hungry, all the arms will kind of like be looking around. And then if one's like, oh, there's food over here, the octopus can sort of organize and be like, well, let's go that way. So there's arguments that it might have 9 brains if you count like the visual nerves, and then all those nerves down the arms. But it's kind of weird. It's a distributed nervous system that they have. They are pretty intelligent, though. I mean, this is an invertebrate. We like to dump on invertebrates. We're like, oh, they don't have backbones. They're not special. Giant Pacific octopus is thought to be about as smart as, we're coming back to it, a house cat. So if you've got a cat, maybe gets up to a little trouble, little too smart for its own good, that's about as intelligent as our octopus is here. So they can solve simple problems and that sort of thing. Anything else? All right, Laura says no. But if you have any questions that we didn't get to, or maybe you just wake up in the middle of the night, you're like, oh, octopus, I should ask this question. You can leave a comment on this video if we're no longer, or once it's published, because we won't be live. And if you're watching this not live and you're not quite wanting to pop a comment out there, you're like, this question might be a little silly, I don't know. You can always email us at asktuffy, that's ASKTUFFY, at alaskasealife.org, and we'll get an answer back to you as well. But before we sign off here, I always want to thank our sponsor. So this season of Virtual Visits has been brought to you by Royal Caribbean Group, letting us bring you these programs free. bring everyone around the world who wants to come to the Sea Life Center. We can at least get you here virtually, and then hopefully someday you can come on up here and see everything for yourself. But it's been really fun doing these. We do have one more next week, so be sure to tune in for that. We're going to be taking a look at the first mammal that we had come in through our wildlife response program for the 2022 season. That's kind of a fun one. It's a little bit interesting, or a little different from our normal mammals that we get. So be sure to tune in for that next week at 11. And we also have our virtual small fry program. If you want to learn a little bit more about octopus, or maybe you've got a younger family member or friend that you think would like to learn about octopus, our virtual small fry program for the past few episodes and wrapping up next week, they've been doing octopus. So that is a pre-K program that we also have free Tuesdays at 11 a.m. on our YouTube channel. One more question. All right, we're going to sneak this one in.
Are there physical changes or behavioral changes that signal when the octopus is ready for breeding, or do you just know that they are ready based on their age?
That's a great question. Are there physical or physiological differences when they're reaching that breeding period? So yes, their appetite will drop off substantially because they're not interested in food. They're interested in breeding, and that ultimately spells the end of their life, right? They're going to live off of what they have. They might eat a little bit here and there, but they're not as interested in food. They will also become much more active, as we saw. And unfortunately, I'm going to pan the camera over there. El Dorado's just been napping the whole time. Not a care in the world right now. But they will become substantially more active as well when they get to that breeding period of their life, because they're like, where are the mates? I need to find mates. And then the males will display that they're ready to deliver spermatophore packets. So they'll actually basically hand that breeding material to the female. She can hold on to that until she's ready to settle into a den. And so we can see that like they're exhibiting that behavior. And then finally, kind of towards the end, the female will get really active, and then she'll get not active, and she'll just tuck in a corner. She'll lay eggs down and just guard those eggs. And so that's kind of the behavioral changes we see. Biologically, yeah, their body starts to waste away. Their organs start to sort of atrophy. Those aren't things we can really see early on. It's mostly those behaviors that we look for. That's a great question. Fantastic question. So with that, we're going to sign off, excuse me, for our program today. I hope you enjoyed another virtual visit here to the Alaska SeaLife Center. And I hope I'll see you next week for another one. Until then, have a good time.